Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. In today's video, I'll be taking you through a detailed step-by-step tutorial on how to make this beautiful asymmetric built-up neckline dress. It features a princess dart, a tulip sleeve, a full flare with tulle at the hem, and it also has pockets. If this looks like what you're interested in, then please keep watching and let's get started. These are the materials we'll be needing, and I have ankara here. I have 6 yards. I won't be using all of that. I'll be using about 5 yards because the lower part of this dress is a full flare. And we'll also be needing a lining. About 2.5 or 3 yards should be enough depending on the measurements you are working with and how you want your lining to be on the dress. If you are not adding lining to the lower part of your dress, 1 yard should be enough. And then this is tulle, and I have about 5 yards here, and I also have stay. So for the stay, you'll be needing about a yard depending on how you want it on your dress. And then I also have wadding for padding the bust area of this dress. In this video, we are going to be drafting the upper part of the dress on a pattern paper, and the lower part will be cutting directly on our fabric, and I'm going to be uploading a separate video for the sewing of this dress. And we are going to be starting with the front pattern, and this paper here is on fold, and I came down by 2 inches from the top of the paper to serve as our shoulder line, and then I placed my tape on the line and marked 11 inches for bust point, 14 inches for under bust, and 17 inches for waistline. And then I'm going to be connecting this with straight lines, and then after that I'm going to be marking the shoulder measurement I am working with divided by 2, and the shoulder measurement I'm working with is 16 inches divided by 2 is 8. I'll mark that down, and then I'm going to mark 3 inches for the neck width and 3 inches for the neck depth, and then I'm going to be using my pattern master to connect with a curve. And then I'm going to be marking 1 inch downwards from the shoulder to create a shoulder slope, and then I'm going to be connecting that into the neckline with a slant line using my rule. Next, I'm going to place my tape on the 1 inch we came down by, and then I am going to mark the armhole measurement I am working with, and the armhole measurement I'm working with here is 8 inches. I'm going to place that like this, and then I am going to extend the line into the center front. Okay, so what we have here is 9 inches, and then on the center front I went ahead to mark 9 inches as well. So that's going to be our chest line. I'll just go ahead to connect with a straight line, and then I'm going to label my lines. We have the chest line, we have the bust point, we have the under bust, and then we have the waist line. And then the next thing I'm going to do is to mark the shoulder measurement I am working with on the chest line, so which is 8 inches, and then I'm going to connect the line from this point all the way to the shoulder slope, and then I'm going to mark what I have here, which is 8 inches. I'll divide it by 2 to get 4. I'll go in by ½ inch, and then I'm going to mark the bust measurement I'm working with divided by 4, which is 36 inches divided by 4 is 9 inches. I'll go ahead to mark that, and then I'll connect the points using the curved part of my rule. And then the next thing I'm going to do is to mark the nipple to nipple measurement I am working with, and the nipple to nipple measurement I am working with is 8 divided by 2 is 4. I marked 4 on the bust point. On the under bust I marked 3.5, and on the waistline I marked 3.5. So you just subtract ½ inch from your nipple to nipple measurement to mark on the under bust and on the waistline. And then I'm going to use my rule to connect the points, and then I'm going to be marking 2 inches on the side of this. Going towards the side of the paper, I'll be marking 2 inches on the under bust and on the waistline, and then I'm also going to connect with a straight line, and then I'm going to connect with a curve into my bust point. You can use your free hand to do this if you do not have a pattern master, but just make sure that your curve comes out looking nice. And then after that, the next thing I'm going to do is to connect from the midpoint of the armhole into the bust point. So I'll just go ahead to connect that with my rule, and then I'm going to be coming down from the midpoint of the armhole by 2 inches. I'm going to mark that down, and then I'm going to use my rule to connect into the bust point as well. Next, I'm going to be going up from this point by 2 inches to replace the 2 inches we had taken, so that the side does not become short when we are joining it to the center front piece. So I'll be using my rule to connect that into the line that I had drawn earlier, and then after that I'm just going to create a new armhole. Okay, so just use the curved part of my ruler now, and then I'm going to create a new armhole. And then the next thing I'm going to do is to mark down the bust measurement I am working with divided by 4. I'll be replacing the dot on this line here, which is about 0.75 inches, and then I'm going to be adding my sewing allowance of 1.5 inches. And then on the waistline, I'm going to be marking the waist measurement I'm working with divided by 4. I will mark that down and then replace the dart of 2 inches that we had taken, and then add my sewing allowance of 1.5 inches, and then I'm just going to connect that into the chest line. So this part is the part we'll not be needing. We are going to be cutting all of this out. Next, we are going to be working on our built up neckline, and I'll be going out from the neck width by 0.25 inches and then going in by half of an inch, and then on the half of an inch point I'll go up by 1.5 inches, and then I'm just going to connect that with a straight line, and then I'm going to be extending the line into the center front, and then I'm going to be connecting from the 0.25 inches into the top of the line like this. Next, we are going to be cutting this out, so just watch carefully to see the parts I'm going to cut out. And then after cutting, this is how it looks. As you can see, the side matches the center front, and that is why we replaced the 2 inches that we had taken, so that it matches and it's not short when we are joining. So the next thing we're going to do now is to create our neckline, and for the neckline, what I'm going to do is to place my tape on the shoulder line, and then I'm going to come down by 6 inches. So just take note of where my tape is placed. So on this line here, I'm going to come down by 6 inches. This is the center of the paper, and then I'm going to be going in from this center point by 3.5 inches, and then after that I'm going to be using the curved part of my rule to connect from the neckline all the way to this 3.5 inches on the side, and then I'm also going to connect from the other side of the neckline into the 3.5 inches point as well. After connecting, the next thing we are going to do is to cut out, and our front pattern is ready. If you've come this far and you have not subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? Please do well to hit on the subscribe button, and also please do not forget to turn on notification bell to get notified each time I post a new video. And also please do not forget to give this video a thumbs up if you find it helpful, and if you have questions, please do not forget to drop your questions in the comments. Next, we are going to be drafting the back, and for the back as well, I'm going to be coming down from the top of the pattern paper by 2 inches the same way we did for the front, and then I'm going to be connecting with a straight line. And then the next thing I'm going to do is to place my tape on the line. Okay, so this line is our shoulder line. I'm going to be marking chest line 9 inches and then waistline of 17 inches the same way we marked for the front, and then extend the line. And then for the center back, we are going to be marking 1.5 inches for our zipper allowance, and then connect with a straight line. And then we are going to be connecting our chest line and then our waistline as well with a straight line. The next thing to do is to mark the shoulder measurements divided by 2, which is 16 by 2 to get 8 inches, and then the neck width of 3 inches the same way we marked for the front. And then on the chest line, I marked the shoulder measurement divided by 2 as well, and then I came down by 1 inch for the shoulder slope and slanted that into the neckline, and then connected my armhole line with a straight line. And then the next thing we're going to do now is to mark the neck depth for the back. So I'll be coming down by 1 inch, and then I'm going to be connecting that into the neck width. So we are not going to be using this, okay? We are not going to be using this because we are creating a built up neckline. And then after that, the next thing I'm going to do is to mark the nipple to nipple measurement I'm working with, which is 4 inches. I'll mark that on the chest line, and then I'll also mark it on the waistline as well. Like I said, take note of where I am placing my tape, and then I'm going to connect with a straight line. And then the next thing I'm going to do now is to come down from the chest line by 1 inch, and then mark half inches from both sides of this line, okay, which is that line. And then I'm going to be connecting it with my rule to the 1 inch that we came down by from the chest line. So this is going to be our back dart, and then I'm going to be marking the bust measurement I'm working with divided by 4 on this point. That's the chest line point, and then I'm going to be adding 1.5 inches for sewing allowance on the waistline as well. Mark waist divided by 4, replace the dart of 1 inch, and then add 1.5 inches for sewing allowance, and then connect with a straight line to meet the chest line. And then the next thing I'm going to do is to create the back armhole. So I'll just go ahead to use my rule to just create a curve into the line like this. And then we are going to be extending our zipper allowance line all the way. And after that, we are going to be working on our built up neckline. So I'm going to be labeling this part zipper allowance. So for the center back on the lower part, you're going to be going in by 1/2 inch to eliminate zipper bulge for the back. Okay, so we'll be cutting this part out, and then like I said, we are going to be working on our built up neckline, and we're going to be doing the same thing we did for the front. Go out from the neck width by 0.25 inches, and then come in from the neck width by 1/2 inch, and then go up from the 1/2 inch point by 1.5 inches. Connect with a straight line from the 1.5 inches to the 1/2 inch point we came in by, and then extend the 1.5 line into the center back. And then we're going to connect from the top of the line into the 0.25 inches that we went out by from the neck width. And then we're going to be coming down by 1/2 inch for the center back. That is going to serve as the neck depth. So I'm going to be connecting it with the curved part of my rule. Just connect with the curve and then extend it into the zip allowance line, because our zip is going to be going inside this neckline. And then I am going to cut out. So just watch carefully to see the part I am going to cut out. After cutting, this is how the back looks. As you can see, the next thing I'm going to do now is to measure what I have on the neckline here and make sure that it matches what I have on the front. So I'm going to be placing the front on it like this, and then I'm going to check if it matches. As you can see, it does match. So I've gone ahead to cut on my fabric. As you can see, this is how it looks. I added 1/2 inch to my shoulder line. The neckline here I added 1 inch because I didn't want it as deep, so you can go ahead to just add 1/2 inch on that part. And then I went ahead to add 1/2 inch on the sides, and then on the lower part as well I added 1/2 inch, but for the side of the armhole, for the center front, I did not add any allowance. And then for this piece as well, I added 1/2 inch for joining the bust area and then on the lower part, but on the side of the front piece I didn't add any allowance because we already added that while drafting the pattern. So this is the back. I did not add any allowance on the zipper side, and on the side of the back as well I did not add any allowance because we already added that while drafting the pattern. I only added on the shoulder and on the neckline and on the lower part. So I went ahead to mark my dart line and then my zipper allowance line. That's where my zip is going to go into, and then I went up by 1 inch on the center back and slanted it into the waistline to eliminate zipper bulge, and that's because the front half length is usually longer than the back half length. So after cutting that, I'll go ahead to notch on the zip allowance point. That's where my zip is going to be, and also on the dart point as well. The next thing we are going to do now is to cut the lower part, and for the lower part we are going to be cutting it as a 360-degree flare. The formula for calculating a 360-degree flare is waist measurement all over 2 pi, and pi here is 3.14. The waist measurement I am working with is 32 divided by 6.28, which is 2 pi, but we are not going to be working with that. We are going to be cutting two 180-degree flare. 180 plus 180 is going to give 360. So we're going to be dividing the waist measurement by 2, okay, and then we are now going to be dividing what we get by 3.14. So that's the formula for calculating a 180-degree flare. Waist divided by 3.14. But like I said, we are cutting 2 of it, and that's why we had to divide the waist by 2. So the radius I got is 5.1. So that's the radius I'm going to be using. So I'm just going to add the length I am working with to the radius to give me the length I am going to be folding my fabric with. So this is 180 plus 180 is 360. So you don't get confused, you're going to be cutting 2 of 8 like I said. So for folding my fabric, the length I am working with for the dress is 45 inches. I want the length of the dress to be 45 inches. So I am going to subtract the half length from the length, that's the waistline we use, which is 17 inches. I'll subtract that from 45 inches and it's going to give me 28 inches. So now I'm going to be adding 28 inches to the radius of 5.1 that we got, and then I got 33.1, and then I'm going to be adding allowance on this lower part of the dress. So I'll be adding about 1.5 inches on the lower part, 1 inch for hemming the lower part, and half inch for joining the upper part of this to the half length of the dress. And I got around 34.6 thereabouts. So that is the length, that's going to be the length of my fold. Okay, so this is my fabric here, and from this part I'm going to be measuring my 34.6, and maybe I'll use 35 or 36 inches thereabouts, and then I'm going to fold it. So I folded it, and then I'm going to be folding again to have like a triangle, as you can see here. So this is how it looks. Then after folding, I'm going to make sure that everything lays well, and then from the top part, now I'm going to mark the radius I am working with, which like I said is 5.1 inches. So we are going to be cutting this, and this is going to be the front, and I'm going to cut it and make sure that I have allowance for joining the sides. You can decide to add that allowance before looking for your radius, but I am not going to be doing that. I'll just go ahead to cut my piece, and then I'll go ahead to make sure that I have allowance after cutting for joining the sides. So a flare cutting usually has a funny way of becoming too wide after cutting, and that's why I did not add the allowance while calculating the radius. So on that line now, I'm going to mark the length of this lower part, which is 28 inches plus 1.5 inches to give me 29.5, but I just made it 30 inches. And then I'm going to be placing my tape on that line, and then I'll be marking 30 inches all the way till I get to the other side. And then after that, the next thing I'm going to do is to cut this out. If you've watched up to this point and you have not subscribed, what are you waiting for? Please do not forget to hit on the subscribe button. And if you're a returning subscriber, thank you so much for stopping by. I love you guys. And also, please do not forget to like the video if you find it helpful, and then drop your questions in the comments if you have questions as well. So guys, after cutting, this is how it looks. As you can see, the next thing we are going to do now is to cut the back. Okay, this is going to be the front. So for the back, I'll just go ahead to fold my fabric. I'll just be folding it into 2 this time around. I just folded into 2, as you can see, and then I'm going to be placing the front on the back. So just watch carefully to see how I'm going to be doing this. I'm going to be placing it this way, and I'll make sure that I have about 1 inch on the center back for my zip allowance. Okay, so as you can see here, I placed it this way, and then I made sure that I have 1 inch on the center back for zip allowance. Okay, all the way down. Okay, so before I cut this, I'll make sure that everything aligns. Okay, make sure that everything aligns. And as you can see here on this part, it's kind of short, so I have to pull this a little bit more. Okay, so it gets to where the front fits properly, and then I'm going to place the front again on it. And like I said, make sure that you have allowance on the center back for zip, and then I'm going to be cutting out. Okay, I'm just going to be tracing the front. The only difference between the front and this is the zip allowance that it has at the back, and also we are going to be slashing open on that zip allowance point. So I'm going to be cutting it this way, and then on the lower part as well, I'm just going to be tracing what I have here and then cut out. After cutting this out, the next thing we are just going to do is to open up the zip allowance point. So I'll just go ahead now to slash this part open. So we're going to be having two pieces for the back and then one piece for the front, and then we're going to be adding pockets to this piece. So what I'm going to be doing next now is to mark the point where the pocket is going to sit. So I'll just create notches on that point. So I will be placing the front and the back like this on the sides, and then I'll come down by 3 inches from the waistline, and then I'm going to mark that, and then I am going to come down from the 3 inches by 7 inches, which is going to serve as pocket opening. So I'm going to be knotting on the 3 inches point and then mark 7 inches and also notch as well. So that's where our pocket is going to start, from the 3 inches, and then the opening is going to stop at the 7 inches. So I'll repeat the same on the other side, and then I'm going to be cutting my pocket. For the depth here, I have about 12 inches, and then I marked 7 inches downwards, and then I just created like a teardrop shape to meet the 7 inches, and then I'm just going to cut this out. So I have two pieces here. I'll be adding another two pieces to make 4 pieces for the pocket bags. We've come to the end of this tutorial. The sewing video will be coming up soon. Do well to turn on notification bell so you don't miss out. Thank you so much for stopping by. Bye. See you in my next one.